Welcome back, everybody, to our weekly immigration news recap. Today, I'm joined by my friend Sam Peak. We're going to talk about this week's immigration news. I'll let Sam introduce himself in just a minute here, but Sam, I always like to timestamp when we record these podcast episodes because we record them on Thursdays, release them on Fridays, and oftentimes, even though we talk about the up-to-date news, a lot changes between now and then. So we just like to caveat that. So it is just 3 minutes shy of 12 p.m. noon on Thursday, June 19th. And we'll be releasing this tomorrow morning. And I know a lot of the immigration attorneys who may be listening in later on are at AILA right now in Denver. But Sam and I are not. Sam and I are here to talk about all the changes in the immigration news from this week. So just a quick intro on Sam. He's the Labor and Mobility Policy Manager at the Economic Innovation Group. And prior to that, he was a senior policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity and has a long career now of being very involved in immigration policy advocacy and closely following the gears and levers of immigration policy making in DC. So, Sam, that's a quick intro, but maybe tell the folks who are listening in a little bit more about your background, your career, and what you're doing now at EIG.
Yeah, I think that you summarized it better than I could. But I was interested in immigration policy from a very early age. Not from like the age of one, but like the age of like my mid-20s, really, even before like Trump came on the scene. The economics of immigration I've always found fascinating, and I moved from Kansas City to Washington D.C. with the hope of eventually working on immigration policy, just because I've always been so fascinated by the economics of it, the counterintuitive nature on how more people and an economy, they create opportunities. They don't take up space, and a lot of people are primed to think that they just take up space. And so that's shaped a lot of my thinking. That positive aspect around immigration can be applied to people in general, really. And so that's formed my worldview. But I've been involved in immigration advocacy, first at Americans for Prosperity, then at Economic Innovation Group, advocating for bipartisan immigration reforms. And talking to lawmakers from all across the political spectrum, from things like international students to things like HOA, agricultural worker visas. I focused a lot on low-skilled immigration at Americans for Prosperity. Now, primarily, I'm focused on high-skilled immigration at Economic Innovation Group and helping our research team get their research out there, popularize that for a Hill audience, and help popularize some of our ideas. And help sort of challenge the status quo with proposing new visa programs to lawmakers. So that might not be super viable right now, but I think in the future we're laying the foundation for something in the future. So.
Yeah, as we'll maybe talk about in a minute, at the very least, the opinions of lawmakers in Congress can still sway a lot of what the administration's doing. We'll get into the news in just a second, but I'm curious because the majority of immigration practitioners obviously don't live in the DMV area. They don't live in DC or Southern Maryland or Northern Virginia and aren't in that world. You started, you grew up in Missouri and Kansas City, started your career there, and then moved to DC. What's the biggest difference that you experienced in how immigration is perceived and sort of what the brand of immigration is in Kansas City, where you grew up in the heartland, versus by the folks that you work and spend time with in DC?
I think that people think about it less in Kansas City, not necessarily because there are fewer immigrants, but just because they're not as tuned into the politics of it. I went to a very small school in the greater Kansas City area called Park University, and they have almost 50% international students. And it's more just like you're a fish swimming in water. You don't really realize you're in water. They're just there, and they were part of our social fabric. We didn't really think anything of it. Obviously we'd have cultural festivals and stuff like that, but it was just something we accepted, and it wasn't really bothering any, no one's bothered by it. We're friends with everybody. It was something that we just kind of shrugged our shoulders, yeah, we have a lot of international students. Who cares, in DC, despite having a lot of immigrants, in the area, and there's people still, they're incentivized to have opinions about immigrants because they're working for a political office. And so there's a lot more polarization there just because there's that pressure, I think, to keep political narratives in people's heads because they're either working for one side or the other side. And so they don't let their lived experience shape their views on immigration at all. They're incentivized to just have this abstract, not fully fleshed out, often polarized narrative, whether it's that all immigrants are good and helpful, all immigrants are bad and evil and drains on our resources, and they don't let their experiences do any of the lifting whatsoever. And so that's what I see as the contrast there.
I think that's a really good observation because and it's a perfect segue into some of the news stories that we're going to cover today because a lot of the new policies that we're seeing coming out very much are a reflection of that dichotomy, that political dichotomy that you just referenced, where you could boil policies down to either immigration good or immigration bad. And similar experience for me growing up on the coast of Maine. I worked summer jobs, and if we didn't have J1 workers, at the restaurants that I worked at or in some of the landscaping companies, like the economy in the summer wouldn't function, and it's fully a tourist economy on the coast of Maine in the summer. But we didn't really think that much about it, right? And until I got to DC, that's where you start to hear a lot more conversations about both at a deep level from a lot of, I think, really thoughtful people, and then also at a more shallow level from some more just like political talking heads about whether or not immigration is, good or bad for the country. And there's obviously a lot more to it. So today we're going to primarily cover three stories. First, yesterday, Politico released a story that the State Department is going to be resuming visa application appointments for F, M, and J visa holders, and they have a new social media screening criteria. So we'll hit on that first. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the Trump administration's flip-flopping over the last week around their policies of ICE targeting businesses, employers, but farm and hospitality businesses in particular. And then we'll finish up with some of the reporting on leaks about the Trump administration expanding its entry ban that was originally announced on June 4th for about a dozen or more countries and went into effect on June 9th. There's reports that that'll be expanded to an additional few dozen countries. So we'll talk about that at the end, and then we'll wrap it up with Sam giving his take on a trend, a story, something that he thinks is not getting a lot of attention in the immigration practitioner community that might start to have a big impact on immigration practitioners in the next few months here. So we can jump right into it. Sam, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
I'm going to start by sharing my screen with the Politico story that came out yesterday. So this is from Nahal Tuzi, who was actually the reporter who got the exclusive access to the original State Department cable about 3-4 weeks ago that announced that appointments would be paused for the FM and J students. And she runs through some of the sort of key quotes that she picked up from the cable. So first piece of news from this is that the State Department is directing consular officers to review applicants' online presence for any indications of hostility towards the citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles of the United States. Goes on a little bit further here. And as always, I'll link the article in the show notes so folks can come and read it themselves. One of the things that stuck out to me in particular was now that appointments have been paused for 3 or 4 weeks now, there is a backlog of nobody knows how many, but tens, potentially hundreds of thousands of applicants who are looking to apply for their FM or J visas. And the State Department's going to have to catch up on that backlog throughout the summer. And the cable gave a little bit of information about how they're going to prioritize appointments for these students and for other applicants in the J and M categories. The cable said that embassies should prioritize interviewing physicians applying for a J1 visa for educational exchange or students looking to study at a U.S. university where international students constitute 15% or less of the total student population. So those are the two apparently groups that the consulates abroad are going to be prioritizing to catch up on the backlogs. Later yesterday, the State Department released an official announcement on this new policy, which is good to see. Folks might remember that previously, when the pause went into effect, the State Department didn't publicly acknowledge it for several days. They came out with the official announcement shortly after the Politico article was released, but it didn't have all of the details that were in the leaked cable that Politico obtained. That said, it does confirm that there will be additional social media vetting of FM and J visa applicants, and that they'll resume scheduling those appointments. The last thing I want to show on this is, before I get Sam's reaction, is a couple of weeks ago during just sort of it was a White House event that had nothing to do with immigration, but this is back when the sort of the Harvard standoff with DHS was going on.
These countries aren't helping us. They're not investing in Harvard and all of we are. So why would 31%, why would a number so big? I think, number one, I think they should have a cap of maybe around 15%, not 31%. We have people want to go to Harvard and other schools. They can't get in.
So Sam, I flagged this yesterday in a LinkedIn post, but if you look at the Ivy Leagues, for example, they average about 27% foreign student enrollment, right? And so while this new State Department guidance to consulates isn't a new policy that enacts the cap that President Trump proposed there, it does, prioritize universities that are have less than 50% student enrollment, and that could have a big impact for incoming freshman classes of universities that have a higher student enrollment. So we've seen, this is just one of many stories, one of many sets of policies that have been targeted at F1 students in particular and foreign students in particular. How do you sort of see this playing out over the next several months? What do you think the Trump administration's next moves will be when it comes to how they're building policies around foreign students?
Yeah. I think that I think on the social media vetting point, we saw something somewhat similar to this in the previous administration, where they made it optional for visa applicants to list their social media handles. And even during then, we saw denials that seemed arbitrary or, like misunderstandings. Like one example I remember is that there was like someone who wanted to like party, he's like from the UK, and he said he wanted to destroy the United States. And it was like slang, and he got denied for like that reason. And so I can just imagine a lot more arbitrary denials during the interview process for that reason. That's the simple answer. I think the longer answer is that I'm not sure by what extent yet, and I think it'll vary by consular office, because each embassy, each U.S. embassy, I think, acts as their own fiefdom with their own sort of internal cultures and how they do things. And so we could see a lot higher rejection rates based off of the social media vetting compared to others. I mean, a lot of the way, in my opinion, the consular officers, vet this stuff, it is based off of, arbitrary reasons. I remember one immigration lawyer had said that when he spoke with a consular officer once, he said that the consular officer said that he knew he was going to deny people the first 5 seconds after meeting somebody during an interview, and he justified it by Malcolm Gladwell's like Blink, which it's about human bias. It's not saying you should also treat people with that same human bias, But so I do think this will be applied pretty arbitrarily and capriciously across different consular offices, and I think that at worst we can see rejection rates because of these social media tools kind of explode. As far as the 15% cap, I'm not sure what kind of legal challenge that there would be. I'd imagine that there would be some kind of legal challenge, because the idea to prioritize resources for based off of the international enrollment in schools is going to be that doesn't seem like it's a a very it's a standard that's kind of made out of whole cloth, out of thin air, based off of a statement made by the president off the cuff. And so I think that people will be looking for legal challenges there. I think though that how they find that data, are they going to ask internationals, or are they going to ask schools for all their international student data? A lot of them probably do have that there for in like their marketing materials and like annual reports, but like how they acquire that information, I think is going to be very interesting and a challenge, asking them to fork over these materials. And then also the incentives at play here. Are international students going to be going to schools that have fewer foreign students? Are they going to migrate away from Harvard and towards the University of Central Missouri or something like that, or University of Kansas or Dakota State University? Are they going to go to these other schools with fewer international students, yet rely a lot on international students in like grad programs too? That's the other thing here too, is like, like a lot of these schools, despite maybe they have a small overall fraction of their student body being international students, their engineering school still might be like 99% international students, right? And so we might see those engineering schools in like the Midwest and the and places like Utah and maybe even like Maine. We might see more international students fill those ranks in those master's degree programs.
Yeah, no, those are all great points, and I think they sort of fall under the common theme here. And I've been talking with other guests of this podcast in the past couple of weeks about this, which is the State Department, because of the discretion that consular officers have, that USCIS and CBP officers don't necessarily have the same level of unsupervised discretion to approve or deny visas. The consulates are going to be sort of the testing sandbox, right, for all of these new policies, including social media vetting, and it's going to be really difficult for practitioners who are advising clients, J1 applicants, Fs in some cases. But this is ultimately my sense is that this is ultimately going to trickle to all employment based and family-based and asylum-based immigration applicants at consulates overseas. They're going to have a difficult time being able to like advise them on what to or what not to do based off of trends that are happening at consulates overseas, because like we talked about before we started recording, the State Department like doesn't have to report on a lot of the reasons that they're denying these applications, what exactly they're flagging on social media specifically, that raises a red flag that might lead to a visa denial.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too, in addition to that eventual trickle of having this standard and these tools apply to other non-immigrant immigrant visas, I think the common sense assumption that this is also going to be used to judge other sorts of things and other criteria for like visa compliance that aren't even like listed in that Politico article that says, like I think that most people would assume reasonably so that they're going to be looking at more things than just biases against the United States or like supporting terrorist groups. I mean, you could maybe even use social media to glean, for example, are they going to like do they have immigrant intent? Maybe something in their social media could indicate they have immigrant intent. And we saw, that the Trump administration did reverse how they judge non-immigrant intent for student visas early on. They reversed guidance, which had originally stated that international students, we give them the benefit of the doubt and we acknowledge that they're young. They don't have, the ties, back home to demonstrate that they will go back home because they're young. And we accept the fact that you can have non-immigrant intent when you arrive, but that intent can change in the future based on your experiences in the United States, right? And that was how the Bush and Obama and Biden administrations have done that. And so I think that you will see a lot of these other things that using social media to judge all these other things that we're not even thinking of. Non-immigrant intent is just one example of those things.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch the data come in on this, because the one thing the State Department does report on monthly is visa issuances by category. So we will be able to see, this policy went into place at the end of May, so June's numbers won't be out yet. But it will be interesting to see sort of the change between May and June, and then throughout the summer of FJ and M visa. One, applications in general, and two, actual approvals at the consulates. Likely those are going to go down. Although again, the backlog that is built up, there might be a slight spike for a little while, and then it may go down. But how much of a delay the social media vetting will add to the overall process for each applicant, and how that will affect all applicants, I think we'll be able to see in the next few months. But overall, the administration's suite of policies targeting and making it more difficult for students to foreign students to come to the U.S. and even potentially work in the U.S. after graduation, according to incoming USCIS director Joseph Emblo's comments at a Senate hearing around trying to restrict OPT and STEM OPT authorization in the future. 2-3 years from now, you and I might be sitting on this podcast looking at a chart of, international student enrollment just tanking from 2024 to 2025, 2026, and 2027, which is going to have a lot of consequences at a broad level. Okay. Anything else on that story? You're cool if we move to the next one?
No, I just want to say I agree that if OPT and STEM OPT doesn't end, we're going to see we're likely to see a decline in both, I think, the quantity and also the quality of international students as well.
Mm-hmm.
We saw when we restricted H-1B visas, students that came to the United States actually had lower test scores than before. There's a lot of research showing that the STEM OPT extension under the Obama administration actually increased international STEM enrollment, and so I think that we will see consequences that are pretty predictable if those get rescinded.
And that's why I spotlight these stories in this podcast in particular. A lot of the folks who listen to this podcast are employment-based immigration practitioners who work with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies in the U.S., primarily on H-1Bs, Ls, TNs, but a lot of the foreign nationals that they eventually end up working with are on F1 OPT and F1 STEM OPT. And while they may not be impacted by some of these policies right now, these are signals, and they're upstream changes that are going to ultimately impact practitioners and their clients significantly in the next 6 to 24 months and throughout the administration. So that's why we flag that stuff here. Let's move on to the next story. I'll just recap sort of the saga here quickly. But the Trump administration has been flip-flopping quite a bit on its policies around ICE targeting employers, specifically farm and hospitality businesses, with ICE raids for arrests and deportations. So this whole sort of saga started, if we had to pick a starting point, back on May 28th, Axios reported that in a closed-door meeting, Stephen Miller reportedly lambasted ICE officials that the arrest numbers were far too low, and that ICE needed to be hitting a goal of an average of 3,000 arrests a day. And supposedly in the meeting, according to sources, he, explicitly said ICE officials should be targeting employers, Home Depot as an example, 7-Eleven, a few others. And a couple weeks later, right, we started to hear reports of that happening in practice, and that culminated in the events in LA recently as well. Because there was a lot of ICE activity at employers. And so then one other story came out about Miller's increased influence with ICE over the early weeks of June, which was that he was really encouraging ICE officials to increase employer site visits, but also I-9 audits. And that's something that a lot of immigration practitioners in the industry have been reporting as well. They're getting a lot more inquiries from their clients and from folks who aren't even their clients about having those immigration law firms come in and help them prepare for a potential I-9 audit, because there's been increased activity on that front. So then on June 12th, this is last week, and Sam, my colleague Matt and I covered this on our podcast last week. Tom Homan, the border czar, this is reported by Semaphore, basically reiterated in an interview that ICE would be increasing its crackdowns on employers. But then that same day, President Trump puts out a Truth Social post like saying that, hey, I'm hearing from my friends in the hospitality and ag industries that our policies on doing arrests at these businesses are a real problem. So changes are coming. At a White House event, Peter Doocy from Fox News followed up with a question to President Trump about that, and he doubled down and said, "Yeah, no, changes are going to come. We're gonna change the policy of ICE going after employers." On Saturday, the Guardian reported, and I'll pull this article up, Sam, that President Trump's comments from earlier that week were going into effect, right? That the Trump administration was going to hold off on all worksite enforcement investigations and operations, specifically for meatpacking plants, farms, restaurants, hotels, all of that. And this came from a leaked email from Tatum King, who's a senior official within ICE. But then, just a couple of days later, the Washington Post reported that the Trump administration reversed again, right? And that DHS sent out a new memo on Monday saying that workforce enforcement remains a cornerstone of our efforts to safeguard public safety, national security, and economic stability, and that there will be no safe spaces for specific industries who harbor violent criminals or purposely try to undermine ICE's efforts. So then finally today, Axios reported that there's this tug of war still continues, right? And that President Trump and his advisors are sort of going back and forth, the different fiefdoms that exist within the administration around whether or not the Trump administration should be actively going after employers in the landscaping and in the hospitality and agricultural industry, but also in other industries. And that this debate is continuing to go on even today, Thursday, June 19th. So Sam, your background has been, like you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, in sort of low-skilled immigration and, with immigrants who are going to be impacted or already have been impacted by some of these ICE raids and the businesses that employ them. What's sort of your take on the tug of war that's going on inside the administration and like how this might ultimately shake out in the coming weeks? Which faction within the administration, the pro-business who wants to stop these ICE raids at these particular businesses, or the immigration hardliners, which one of them will win out?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is that if you remember the narrative before Trump came into office, the people thought the tug of war would be on high-skilled immigration and not low-skilled immigration. That turns out to be the complete reversal. It's the low-skilled immigration constituency that has the defenders that the Trump administration is most sympathetic to and live in a lot of red state areas. And so agriculture, hospitality, landscaping, those are the that's where the tug of war is, right? Farmers overwhelmingly supported Trump. People still have like pretty good images of farmers in the public eye. I help with some polling, and in terms of immigration, farmers and small business owners are some of the most trusted people to listen to on immigration. And so they're powerful messengers, and Trump wouldn't want to lose their votes. And Republican lawmakers that are in ag-heavy districts don't want to lose their votes, and they're trying to speak up on behalf of their constituents here. And so, you have Republican lawmakers calling out these raids too. Glenn Thompson is not considered a rhino. He's, in the ag committee. He's in a very, very red district, and he is he's saying that we need to be more calculating with these raids and not going after these industries. I think this is Miller's faction to lose. I think this is the hardliners faction, the hardliners battle to lose here, just because they're the ones with the reins of control here. That doesn't mean that farmers and these other communities can't put up a formidable fight and you get the right people in Trump's ear. That doesn't mean that Stephen Miller won't wear out his welcome and reverse course. We saw with the family separations, he had a reverse course on that. Trump calls Stephen Miller apparently weird Stephen behind closed doors, So there's I think that it remains to be seen on is Stephen Miller going to overplay his hand here, and will farmers and other industry groups speak up louder? I mean, one Fox News interview or multiple Fox News interviews with like a farmer explaining a situation in sound bites can go a long way here, and the other dynamic at play here too is that if we're seeing a lot of these raids here, is this also if these raids actually do escalate and continue, does this also pressure Trump to do stuff on H2A reform as well and H2B reform? Are there any rules he can do to make it to streamline the process for farmers? Farmers right now have trouble with the adverse effect wage rate, which is at a very high wage rate right now. There are some Biden administration rules that make that even higher, which seem pretty unreasonable. If you spend 1% of your job as a truck driver, but you're a field worker for most of the time, you get paid as a truck driver wage. And that truck driver wage is, this is a bit wonky, but cities affect, the salary for that because it's like statewide calculated, that kind of stuff. Trump, that would pressure Trump to maybe do some rulemaking, executive orders that change some of these things. Maybe make it so the employer doesn't have to foot the costs for H2 and H2B workers to travel to the consular office or even to their work site. A lot of stuff that's not in statutes that are burdensome to employers, Trump might try to alleviate, I think, especially if these rates continue. I think that also I think the other narrative here too is the E-Verify narrative too. People see this as a silver bullet, but a lot of these raids have been happening in E-Verify compliant employers. And despite the fact that they are enrolled and use E-Verify, the fact that the system is so easy to fool and that they're still able to present false documents and get through, that's still, somehow on the employer. And I think that aspect of it is going to also create a lot of problems here, and maybe actually revisiting, the conversation on E-Verify, I think might change. How do we actually improve the program and the accuracy of the program and the ease for employers to use this program? Because right now it's the conversation is E-Verify, we should use it, or no, we shouldn't use it. And the E-Verify advocates they're not talking about improving it, they're just talking about using it, And so I think that will also be another point of conversation that could open up here, and perhaps maybe some E-Verify reform could come from the administration, if anything. But the smart money, I think, is that Stephen Miller is going to win this. But I think that if there's any group of people, it's like the H2A, H2B people, or the farmers who are hiring people who don't have legal status in dairy. And so I think that it remains to be seen what happens here.
My thought is, however this shakes out with the two specific industries that keep getting cited in the reporting around this issue, hospitality and ag, will be a signal for what's to come in terms of immigration enforcement for tech companies and Fortune 500 companies that employ, high-skilled immigrants as well. Andrew Craybaum from Bloomberg News reported a couple of weeks ago. It was a very small settlement, but DOJ in January has sort of been taking up some of these worker complaints about bias against U.S. workers in preference to foreign workers. And there's been some settlements on that front. And I think what signal comes from the administration on whether or not the type of industry that you're in, or the fact that people are here on either a legitimate visa or undocumented, if the administration sort of allows the enforcement measures to expand into employers at the low skilled level, I think it'll be followed by the high skilled level.
Yeah, I think so. I think that the issue is that the enforcement measures might be a little bit different, right? It's harder to talk to H2As and H2Bs. Sometimes they don't even have phones on them, when they're like, or they're not they're not checking their phones very much. They're in a place without reception.
Mm-hmm.
They don't speak English oftentimes. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. The majority are Spanish speakers from Mexico who don't know much English. Whereas with FDNS, the fraud detection service at USCIS, they can actually contact H-1Bs and get information from those H-1B recipients themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there is a difference in play there. And then the discrimination stuff, right? Like we see some discrimination claims, from like these at the low skill level, but the discrimination stuff at the high skill level comes from things like the perm process, and also, the treating different job openings that are open to immigrants, differently from from their normal job openings, right? And so, but yeah, I think that the administration, that is a very valid prediction or forecasting, is that you are going to see a lot more elevation from DOJ of discrimination claims, right? Like what we saw with Apple and
Yeah.
Meta. I think
Yeah.
we see a lot more of that.
And through USCIS processing trends and protocols around and new policy announcements that they make for how they maybe interpret policies or rules differently than the Biden administration's USCIS did. Ed Lowe in his Senate confirmation hearing, he only spoke for about 15 minutes, but about 10 minutes of that was how USCIS was going to become an enforcement partner alongside ICE and CBP. And one place that USCIS could do that is in how it adjudicates visa applications. And so I think, just to put a pin in this again, I think immigration practitioners watching how this story plays out in particular, even if you're not involved in agricultural industries, or you're not an H-2A or H-2B lawyer, you should see how this plays out, because it's going to impact all areas of immigration law, I think, in not too long.
Yeah.
Anything else on that story, Sam?
I think that no, I think that sums it up. I think the other thing that I'll add is I think we'll see a reinforcement of these efforts come the fee rule. I think that we will see fees trying to use fees for enforcement, and that's going to be amped up to the nth degree, like we saw from the previous Trump administration.
We talked about some of the fee increases and new fees that'll be created in the one big beautiful bill if that's passed.
Yeah.
And that's just the House version. Who knows what could be added before the final bill comes through.
Yeah.
Okay, last story is fairly quick, but late last week, it was a Friday or early Saturday morning, it was leaked that the Trump administration is currently in the process of expanding the entry ban that they put into place on. It was announced June 4th, and it went into effect, I believe, on June 8th. And now they're in the process of potentially expanding that to 36 other countries. The Washington Post was first to report this late on Friday. Here's the list of the countries that the Washington Post found are likely to be included in this expanded entry ban, according to the memo that they had access to. The vast majority of them are in Africa. I think, Sam, curious what you think, but the two that stick out to me, just in terms of countries that tend to have a high number of foreign nationals in the U.S., especially in the high skilled space, Egypt and Nigeria are two that I know just from the numbers. There are a lot of universities that have students from Nigeria and Egypt, and there are a lot of employers who have folks from both of those countries working in STEM fields right now. So if this entry ban goes into effect, it's not necessarily going to impact them immediately, but it obviously makes foreign travel a lot more difficult. Makes renewing visas a lot more difficult. It constrains them quite a bit. So I guess in general, it was thought that the first travel ban would see legal action against it. The one that was announced at the beginning of the month would see legal action against it pretty much immediately. As far as I know, there hasn't been any legal action against it, and sort of the what I've heard from immigration attorneys is that they litigation proofed this particular travel ban. They knew it's their fourth one, so they knew what they were doing this time and how to avoid taking it to court. It still may be challenged, but if they're going to expand it, right, does that create more opportunities for challenge? What's sort of your take on the Trump administration's policies around these country-specific travel and entry bans, and maybe like what the future holds
Yeah.
on this front?
I bet you have some viewers here who will have like a better sense of the legal grounds that this can be challenged on. As someone who's a non-lawyer, the best that I can do is, point out some of the, internal inconsistencies here with this ban, and maybe that can be, some people try to use that with some cases. But I'm under the impression that they have legal proof this as well, and that will be a lot harder to overturn or rescind. But there are some new elements of this ban too that might create like new points of vulnerability. The ban targeting, a U.S. citizen's ability to sponsor siblings, and adult children being one of them. The sort of inconsistency here with having bans, using overstay rates to justify the bans, and then applying that logic to green card holders or people applying for green cards, right? That's like not like a thing you overstay your thing you're welcome on,
Right.
Yeah. So there's some there's some conflicting reasoning there. And then also the fact that this ban is targeting people who have been waiting many years for a petition as well. That's like that's the other aspect here, is that is that someone who is in the backlog, they're stopping the processing, right? And so is there any like litigation around that as well? Because they've already been waiting for the ban. Now the ban's taking place and they're stopping the processing, right? That's a very unprecedented thing to do here. So I'm wondering if there is any sort of if these newer facts sort of change the outcome of this as well, or change the legal arguments as well. But no, I'm under the impression generally though that they have learned from their mistakes, and that these could be arguments people use, but I think the smart money is that the administration will survive, or this travel ban will survive, just like it did last time.
Do you think, regardless of whether or not there's legal challenges, that it'll stop at these 50 or so countries, or do you think it'll be expanded beyond these countries in the future, especially if it goes unchallenged?
I think it'll be expanded, yeah. I like the recalcitrant country argument is very you can interpret that so loosely, because the definition of recalcitrant country is not very well defined. There have been lawmakers that have noted this, and they've wanted to actually revise the definition of recalcitrant country, just because, like, if India refuses to accept one person for deportation, maybe that should make India a recalcitrant country. Under the current vagueness of the definition right now, it could be, right? And so I think that there are many ways. This is very arbitrary criteria, and there are just many ways to add this, to add countries to this, and there's incentive to add countries to this, and maybe even take off countries, or take off and add countries again. Who knows how many countries can be banned and unbanned and banned again, right? Like that's been a constant feature of this administration, right? Is these sudden like policy changes. I think that the other internal inconsistency here too is that that maybe people will look to is that TPS, Trump rescinded TPS for a lot of these countries, and he's saying that these governments are authoritarian and oppressive, and we don't trust them. And the very regimes that the Trump administration is calling out is threats. He's saying that Haitians can go back home, right? And then he's saying that it's Haiti is safe, they can go back home. Then he's calling out Haiti and saying how horrible like the Haitian government is and how vile the Haitian government is, in the next breath. So I think that it also contradicts like the humanitarian decisions that Trump has made.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the justification for the traveler entry bans is essentially that, right, like these countries don't have the infrastructure in place to
Yeah.
for us to be able to like properly vet them, right? So we're just doing like a blanket ban on these specific countries until they upgrade their infrastructure so that our vetting procedures can uh, know that the documents that they're providing are legitimate and are truthful, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if so that the excuse thus far, not the excuse, but the justification thus far has been national security. Do you think that again, if these first two iterations of the travel ban for the 50 or so countries are able to remain in effect, even with some legal challenges, maybe like the bones of them are able to remain into effect? Do you think some of the economic arguments that a lot of folks in the Trump sphere have been making uh, start to become a justification for additional restrictions, entry restrictions, or travel bans that are country specific? Do you see that coming at some point down the pipeline, or is that pie in the sky?
I think that it could hold some weight. I think unfortunately employers will adapt and they will not hire people of those nationalities.
Yeah.
Uh, it's really unfortunate, but I think that would be that they would adapt that way. I think that you'll see plenty of stories that come out and plenty of trends to come out. I think that you'll see you could see Republican lawmakers, they might have a school in that has a lot of Nigerians or Egyptians, and they could they could raise the alarm on this. We saw this when Trump tried to ban students during COVID in 2020, and like small schools actually do have a lot of power in these Republican congressional districts, because it's the same way why small banks have a lot of political power compared to large banks, is because members like their small bank, they like their small school. A lot of people are employed, and there's this local component there that really matters. And so I think that you will get some pushback from with some aspects of the travel ban. I think that pushback though will be so fractured that and not very organized because of all the disparate interests here, that it will not pan out. You'll see, we saw stories on how this impacted foreign physicians, right? The travel ban prevented we have a lot of doctors from a lot of different countries who were banned, and people even calculated how many appointments were likely missed because of the people who weren't allowed to come because of the travel ban. And so I think that we can expect to see more of that kind of stuff, given how much larger in scope the ban is going to be.
Yeah, and the theme of the first 6 months or so of the Trump administration is that the policy making on the immigration front is moving a lot faster than it did in the first Trump administration. So it's difficult for anyone who is impacted negatively by it, organizations, law firms, companies, universities, to, like you said, sort of organize their rebuttal, organize their pushback against these policies in time for it to make a difference before the next new policy rolls out that they have to go up against. And I think that's something that a lot of immigration practitioners are going to have to adjust to throughout the next 3.5 years, is the speed and the pace of these changes that didn't exist in the first term. All right, Sam. Well, I want to leave the last couple minutes for you to share, a trend or a story, just something that you think is happening in the immigration policy space that isn't getting enough attention, that may impact immigration practitioners, foreign nationals, universities, businesses, et cetera, in the coming months and years as a result of it. So, what do you got?
I think that the trend that I would focus on, that is maybe not a story yet, but will be a story, is what is, and I alluded to this earlier, is the biannual fee increase and what we can expect there. The redoubling of the fraud detection unit, FDNS, at USCIS, and the brain drain. We saw 2 brain drains, or we saw 1 brain drain already, where a lot of people got riffed, they got fired, or they got buyed out at USCIS. We saw a lot of the most experienced people leave. I think a second brain drain will be during the fee increase when they want to really ramp up their fraud detection unit and invest more in auditing people. It's already sort of this cultural norm at USCIS that the people who do fraud detection are the ones who are the most highly compensated, the most experienced. You have the people who are most experienced in vetting applications, you have people who are the most experienced with adjudicating applications now be the ones vetting applications, and that becomes the focus, and it becomes where everybody else wants to end up. So if you're a USCIS official and you want to look good as a top performer, you're going to look like you're being diligent for fraud. You're going to be sending a lot of cases to FDNS and have those cases get looked at by FDNS. And you're going to be rewarded for that. You're going to eventually want to be at FDNS. And the upcoming fee increase, what that is going to do is it's going to likely shift resources from USCIS adjudications to the fraud detection units and make it so that the agency is overall just more of a enforcement-focused agency. I don't think that they'll be as overt as they were last time. Last time they actually tried to shift USCIS fees to ICE. And I think they've learned their lesson. They're not going to do that, but you still have a unit that can collaborate with ICE and all these other enforcement agencies, and that's FDNS. And so I think that we'll see a lot of that, and a lot of change in focus on that, and the fee rule will be an evolution of ICE as an enforcement agency. And we'll also see, I think, a doubling down on charging humanitarian applications as well, right? Like first off, we saw with the Biden administration, he put an asylum fee on employers and employment-based visas. I think we'll see a double asylum fee next time around. We'll have employers pay an asylum fee, and we'll have asylum seekers pay an asylum fee.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation because there's the policy shifts, there's the structural shifts within USCIS, the organizational shifts, especially Edlow is likely to be confirmed by the Senate and fully on as USCIS director in the next couple of weeks here. But then there's sort of the incentives for career USCIS officials, like you laid out there, that is going to have an impact on what the makeup of the overall organization looks like, and how that impacts processing times and processing trends over the course of the next couple of months. And that's obviously something we track really closely at Lawfully, and we're able to show what the trends are, but it's helpful to have folks like you who have very informed and educated observations and forecasts of maybe what might cause the future trends, and then other folks that we have join us who can sometimes break down and analyze what the past trends are. So it's something we'll be looking at really closely, and that's one in particular that I'm not excited, but I'm definitely going to be keeping a closer eye on now that you brought it up.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Sam. Well, anything else you want to plug or add? Anything you're working on at EIG that you want immigration practitioners to know about?
Yeah, my colleague Connor O'Brien released a relatively recent piece. The data was a survey of grad students, and it looks at their earnings premiums of international students or people who came as international students compared to U.S. students, and the findings show that people who arrived in the U.S. as international students have an earnings premium.
We'll have to we'll link that into the show notes so people can go and give that a read too as well. Well, Sam, thanks so much for joining us on this Thursday immigration news recap. Where can folks find you if they want to follow your work?
I believe that my Twitter handle, I believe, is at Speak Samuel.
Twitter, X, LinkedIn, maybe.
You can,
Cool.
LinkedIn, Sam Peak LinkedIn. You can just see me reposting all the immigration lawyers. Follow me if you say something insightful about what you're noticing. I'll probably repost you because I think it's interesting, and it's also my method of bookmarking. So,
oh, me too. Yeah. I go back and look at all my reactions to see, like, especially for this podcast, like, what's in the news this week. So,
yeah.
Well, awesome, Sam. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.